The third explosion ripped through Deck 9, and I grabbed the edge of my console to keep from being thrown across the bridge. Sparks rained from the ceiling panels above me, and the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in that sickly amber glow that meant we had lost primary power on at least 3 decks. My tactical display flickered twice, stuttered through a cascade of static, and then stabilized. What it showed me was worse than every damage report flooding my earpiece combined. We were losing. Not slowly, not in the grinding back-and-forth way that fleet engagements usually played out. We were being taken apart with surgical efficiency by a force that outnumbered us nearly 2-to-1, and every minute that passed put another Velhari warship into the grave. My name is Reva Solari. I hold the rank of commander in the Velhari Union Navy, and I serve as the senior tactical officer aboard the flagship Ascendant Will. 40 minutes earlier, our combined fleet of 40 warships had jumped into the Hollow Corridor, on what was supposed to be a routine patrol sweep. The Hollow Corridor was a stretch of dead space between 2 galactic arms, a lawless transit lane that the Union had been trying to secure for decades. We had made this run 100 times before without incident. 20 minutes ago, 70 Dremok Dominion vessels dropped out of fold space around us in a textbook ambush formation, and the Hollow Corridor became a killing field. The Dremok had planned this down to the last detail. Their interdiction cruisers had positioned themselves at every viable jump corridor before the main force engaged, cutting off our escape routes before a single shot was fired. Their assault frigates came in fast and low, targeting our smaller escort vessels first, picking off the shepherds before turning on the flock, and their 2 command carriers sat at the back of the formation, coordinating the entire attack with the cold precision that the Dominion was famous for. Another impact shook the Ascendant Will, and I heard Lieutenant Fenn at the damage control station calling out hull breaches on decks 4 through 7. Our port shield array was down to 30% effectiveness. The starboard array had failed entirely 6 minutes ago, and the engineering team that had been sent to repair it had gone silent 2 minutes after that. Admiral Korath stood at the center of the bridge, his tall frame rigid, his gray skin pulled tight across his jaw in the way it always did when he was running calculations he did not want to finish. I had served under Korath for 11 years. I had seen him navigate political crises, territorial disputes, and 3 separate fleet engagements without ever losing his composure. Right now, watching him study the tactical display with that frozen expression, I knew he had already done the math, and the answer had come back in the negative. "Commander Solari, status of the jump corridors," he said, and his voice was perfectly steady. That was the tell. Korath only sounded completely calm when things were catastrophic. Any other time, you could hear the warmth in his tone, the dry humor that made him one of the most respected admirals in the fleet. When his voice went flat and even, it meant he was holding himself together by force of will alone. I pulled up the navigation overlay on my console and layered it on top of the tactical map. The 3 nearest jump corridors were marked in red, each one blocked by a cluster of Dremok interdiction ships, broadcasting disruption fields that would tear any vessel attempting a fold space transition to pieces. Beyond those 3, the next closest corridor was over 2 hours away at maximum speed, and we did not have 2 hours. All 3 primary jump corridors are blocked, Admiral. The Dremok positioned interdiction ships at each entry point before they engaged us. They planned this specifically to prevent retreat. We are boxed in on all sides. He said nothing for 3 full seconds. On a Velhari warship bridge in the middle of a fleet action, 3 seconds of silence from the commanding admiral was an eternity. Officers glanced at each other, hands tightened on console edges. The only sounds were the constant drumbeat of impacts against our hull and the wailing of damage alarms that nobody had bothered to silence because there were too many of them. "Full retreat to Rally Point 7, Korath ordered, his voice cutting through the noise with the authority of a man who had commanded warships since before I was born. "All ships, defensive formation Gamma. We hold together, and we push toward Corridor 2. It has the thinnest blockade. If we concentrate our remaining firepower, we can punch through their interdiction line." I relayed the order across the fleet tactical network and watched the surviving ships try to reform. The amber icons on my display shifted and clustered, pulling together into a rough sphere with the Ascendant Will at the center. I counted them as they moved. 28 ships left out of 40. We had lost 12 vessels in 20 minutes. each one crewed by hundreds of Velhari sailors who had woken up that morning expecting a routine patrol. A Velhari destroyer on our outer flank took a concentrated salvo from 3 Dremok frigates at once. The shots punched through its weakened shields and struck the engine block dead center. The destroyer split apart along its keel line, the two halves spinning away from each other in a lazy tumble that scattered debris across 1,000 kilometers. I watched the life signs scatter on my display, and then disappear one by one as the crew was exposed to vacuum. 27 ships. "They are targeting engines specifically," I reported, my voice harder than I intended. "Systematic disabling before they move in for killing shots. This is not a standard fleet engagement, Admiral. This is a coordinated extermination. They intend to leave nothing." "Then we make the extermination expensive," Korath replied. "All batteries, return fire. Priority targeting on their forward screen. If we can break through the frigates, we open a path to the jump corridor." We fought back. I coordinated targeting solutions across the surviving fleet, assigning fire arcs and priority targets, trying to find any gap in the Dremok formation that we could exploit. Our gunners were good, among the best in the Union, and they made their shots count. We destroyed 4 Dremok frigates in rapid succession, and put enough damage into a cruiser to force it out of the fight, trailing smoke and venting atmosphere as it limped toward the rear of the enemy formation. But the exchange rate was devastating. For every Dremok ship we hurt, they killed another one of ours. Their numerical advantage let them rotate fresh ships into their forward line, while damaged vessels pulled back to repair, while we had no reserves, no reinforcements, and no way to replace what we lost. 23 ships, 21, 19. I ran tactical projections on my console, trying scenario after scenario, looking for any combination of maneuvers and firepower that would get us out of this alive. Every projection came back the same way. In 15 minutes, we would not have enough ships left to maintain a defensive formation. In 20, the Dremok would close to boarding range on our crippled vessels. In 30, there would be nothing left of the Velhari Union's Third Fleet, but wreckage and prisoners. I had made peace with a lot of things during my career. I had accepted the risks that came with serving on a warship in contested space. But I had not made peace with dying in an ambush in the middle of nowhere, killed by an enemy that had outmaneuvered us before the fight even started. That was when Ensign Dara at the sensor station said something that changed everything. "Commander, I have an unknown contact." I almost ignored her. In the middle of a fleet engagement with 70 hostile warships, a single unknown contact barely registered as a priority. We had enough problems without chasing phantom returns on a sensor array that had taken damage in the first exchange. But something in her voice made me look over. Dara was young, barely 2 years out of the Naval Academy, but she had sharp instincts, and she was not the type to speak up during a crisis, unless she had something worth reporting. "Specify," I said. "Bearing 174 Mark 06, range 200,000 kilometers. Single vessel, sitting dark at the edge of the combat zone. No transponder signal, no active emissions until approximately 10 seconds ago, when I detected a low-power sensor sweep originating from its position. It just appeared on my scope as if it powered up from cold standby. Size classification?" She paused, and I saw her run the analysis twice before answering. "Sensors are having difficulty resolving a clear profile. There is some kind of interference layer around the hull, possibly a stealth coating or an active countermeasure I am not familiar with. But based on the mass return and the thermal signature, I am estimating the vessel at approximately 1,200 meters in length." Every officer within earshot turned to look at the sensor station. 1,200 meters. The Ascendant Will was 800 meters long, and she was the largest warship in the entire Velhari fleet. The Dremok command carriers, the biggest vessels in the Dominion's order of battle, were roughly 900 meters. Whatever Dara was looking at was bigger than anything on either side of this fight by a significant margin. "Faction identification?" Korath asked, stepping away from the central display and moving toward Dara's station with long, measured strides. "None, Admiral. The energy signature does not match anything in our database. I have run it against every known profile for every spacefaring species on record. Velhari, Dremok, Surani, Kathiri, Pelori, Dren. Nothing matches. This is either a sensor artifact, which I do not believe it is, or it is something we have never encountered before. A cold sensation settled in my chest, the kind of feeling you get when your instincts are screaming at you, and your rational mind has not caught up yet. In a galaxy with dozens of spacefaring species, hundreds of registered warship classes, and a comprehensive database that the Union had maintained for centuries, an energy signature that matched nothing was deeply unsettling. It meant either our database was wrong, or something genuinely new had just entered the equation. Could it be a Dremok reserve force? I asked, voicing the most immediate tactical concern. Something experimental they have been developing in secret? Dara shook her head firmly. The power output is fundamentally wrong for Dremok technology. Their reactors produce a distinctive harmonic in the lower spectrum bands. This vessel's power signature is completely clean. No harmonics, no fluctuation, just a smooth, constant output, at a level that I would classify as impossible if I were not looking directly at the readings. Whatever this ship is running for a power source, it is nothing I have ever seen. Another Dremok volley hammered our dorsal shields, and the deck lurched hard enough to send an unsecured data tablet skidding across the floor. I steadied myself against the console and looked at Korath. He was staring at the sensor display, at that single amber dot sitting at the edge of the combat zone like something ancient and patient, watching smaller creatures tear each other apart. "Keep monitoring," he ordered. "If it moves toward us, or toward the Dremok, I want to know the instant it happens, and try to get me a visual. I want to see what we are dealing with." Dara worked her console and managed to pull a long-range visual feed from one of our surviving sensor drones. The image was grainy, degraded by distance and interference, but it was enough to see the shape of the unknown vessel. It was unlike anything in any database I had ever accessed. The hull was angular, almost geometric, covered in layered plates that overlapped each other like the scales of some enormous creature. The surface was matte black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it, which explained why it had been invisible until it powered up. There were no visible windows, no obvious bridge structure, no decorative elements of any kind. It was function made physical, a machine designed with no purpose other than war, and it radiated menace the way a star radiated heat. And then it moved. The unknown vessel powered up, and the energy readings on Dara's console spiked so hard that her display flickered and recalibrated twice in rapid succession. "Massive energy surge from the unknown vessel," she reported, her voice climbing despite her obvious effort to remain professional. "All systems are coming online simultaneously. Weapons, shields, propulsion, everything at once. The power curve is beyond anything I have ever recorded. I am reading energy output levels that exceed our entire fleet combined." "Communications," Korath snapped, turning to Lieutenant Pell at the comm station. "Are they broadcasting anything?" Pell had been monitoring all frequencies since the engagement began, cycling through standard channels, military bands, diplomatic frequencies, and emergency wavelengths. His hands moved across his console with practiced speed, scanning for any signal from the unknown vessel. Then they stopped. His entire body went rigid, his eyes widened, and in the amber emergency lighting, his face looked like he had just witnessed something that his mind could not accept. "Lieutenant Pell, report," I ordered. He turned to look at me, then at the Admiral, and the expression on his face was something I had never seen before on any officer under any circumstances. It was not fear. It was not confusion. It was disbelief so total, so absolute, that his brain had not yet decided how to process the information it had just received. "I am receiving a short-range broadcast from the unknown vessel," he said, each word careful and deliberate, as if he were afraid that saying them too quickly might make them less true. "Low-band frequency. Widespread. Unencrypted. The signal header is encoded in a language format that I had to run through the historical archive to identify. The main database did not recognize it. I had to go 3 tiers deep into deprecated linguistic files." "What language, Lieutenant?" Korath asked, and for the first time since I had known him, his voice cracked on the last word. Pell swallowed visibly. "Terran Standard, Admiral. The signal is in Terran Standard." The silence that followed was the deepest I had ever experienced on a warship bridge. Every alarm, every impact tremor, every shouted damage report seemed to fade into the background, as if the universe itself had paused to let the weight of those words settle over us. Terran Standard, the language of Earth. The language of humanity. Humanity, which had vanished from the galactic stage 130 years ago, in an event that every species in known space had come to call the dissolution. It had been the defining mystery of the modern era. One day, the humans were there. Colonies spread across 100 systems. Trade routes connecting their worlds to dozens of alien partners. Embassies on every major homeworld. A presence that was not dominant, but was woven into the fabric of galactic civilization like a thread through cloth. And then, over the span of a single standard year, they were gone. Borders sealed, communications silenced. Every colony, every station, every outpost drawn behind a perimeter that no probe, no diplomat, no military expedition, and no intelligence operation had ever been able to penetrate. The humans had pulled a curtain across their territory, and the galaxy had spent 130 years wondering what was behind it. Most species had assumed the worst. A civil war that had consumed them, a plague that had wiped them out, a technological disaster that had thrown them back to a pre-spaceflight state. The theories were endless, and none of them could be confirmed, because no one could get through the boundary to check. In 130 years, not a single confirmed human vessel had been detected in open space. Not a single human communication had been intercepted. Not a single human being had been encountered anywhere outside the sealed perimeter. Until right now. Until this moment, on this bridge, in the middle of a battle we were losing. "Read the message," Korath said, and his voice had found its steadiness again, but it was a different kind of steady. The kind that came not from confidence, but from the understanding that whatever happened next was going to be historic. Pell looked at his screen. He read the words exactly as they had been transmitted, his voice carrying across the silent bridge with perfect clarity. Each word landed like a hammer blow on steel. Terran Naval Vessel Carthage. Identifying hostile engagement in monitored corridor. Weapons free. All non-hostile vessels stand clear. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The Dremok were still firing on our fleet. The hull was still shaking. And somewhere off our port quarter, another Velhari ship was fighting for its life against 3 Dremok frigates. But none of it mattered. Not in that moment. Every officer on the bridge of the Ascendant Will was staring at the sensor display, at the massive contact that had just identified itself as something that should not exist. A human warship, in open space, armed, and declaring its intentions to fight. I looked at Admiral Korath. He looked back at me, and in his eyes I saw something I had never seen in 22 years of service under his command. He had no frame of reference for what was happening, no protocol, no precedent, no chapter in any tactical manual that covered this situation. The most experienced flag officer in the Velhari fleet was standing on his own bridge, looking at his tactical officer for guidance, and I had nothing to offer because I was just as lost as he was. The Carthage began to move, and the galaxy was about to change. I should have been focused on the battle. I should have been coordinating our surviving fleet, managing targeting solutions, doing the job I had trained for over 2 decades. Instead, I stood at my console and watched the impossible unfold on my tactical display like a witness to something that would be argued about by historians for centuries. The vessel that had identified itself as the Terran naval ship Carthage was accelerating toward the combat zone, and the readings pouring in from Dara's sensor station were making experienced officers stop mid-task and stare at their screens with open disbelief. "Speed is climbing past anything in our performance envelope," Dara reported, her hands moving across her console in rapid, precise strokes as she tried to keep up with the data. "That vessel is accelerating faster than a Velhari interceptor, and based on mass analysis, it weighs at least 15 times more than any ship in this engagement. The power output from its propulsion system alone exceeds the total output of the Ascendant Will at maximum capacity, and it is still climbing." Admiral Korath had recovered his composure, though I could see the effort it cost him in the tension along his jaw and the rigid set of his shoulders. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the display with the focused intensity of a man trying to absorb information that kept exceeding the boundaries of his understanding. 130 years, he said, almost to himself, the words barely audible over the ambient noise of the bridge. What have they been doing for 130 years? I did not have an answer. Nobody in the galaxy had an answer. That was rather the point. The Dremok noticed the Carthage within seconds of it powering up. Their sensor networks were good, among the best in the known galaxy, and a vessel of that size producing that much energy was impossible to miss. I watched the Dremok formation shift on my tactical display as their commanders registered the new contact and began reassessing the battlefield. Several ships on their rear echelon peeled away from the assault on our fleet and turned to face the approaching unknown, bringing weapons to bear with the cautious efficiency that characterized Dremok military doctrine. That was their first mistake. Caution implied they thought they had options. The Dremok command carrier is broadcasting demands on multiple frequencies, Lieutenant Pell reported from the communications station. They are ordering the unknown vessel to identify itself, state its intentions, and halt its approach. Standard Dominion Challenge Protocol. They are repeating the demand every 15 seconds. Is the Carthage responding? Korath asked. Negative, Admiral. The vessel has not transmitted anything since the initial broadcast. Complete communication silence on all monitored frequencies. The Dremok made their second mistake 30 seconds later. A heavy cruiser on the outer edge of their formation. A warship roughly 600 meters long and bristling with siege-class plasma batteries, turned its full broadside toward the approaching Carthage and fired what I recognized as a standard Dremok warning volley. 3 plasma lances, concentrated beams of superheated matter contained in magnetic envelopes, streaked across the void and struck the human vessel squarely amidships. The shots hit and did absolutely nothing. I stared at my readings, running the analysis 3 times because the results made no sense. The plasma lances had impacted an energy barrier approximately 300 meters from the actual hull surface of the Carthage. The barrier was invisible to standard optical sensors, detectable only through the energy interaction with the incoming fire. It had absorbed all 3 shots, each one carrying enough energy to gut a Velhari frigate, and dissipated the energy with no measurable degradation to its integrity. The Carthage had not even changed course, had not adjusted speed, had not reacted in any visible way. Shield analysis? I asked Dara, hearing the strain in my own voice. I cannot analyze what I cannot classify, Commander. The barrier technology does not correspond to any known shielding system. It is not graviton deflection. It is not plasma screening. It is not magnetic repulsion. It is not layered particle dispersal. It is something else entirely. And whatever it is, it just absorbed 3 capital-class plasma lances without dropping below 99.7% effectiveness. That should not be physically possible under any theoretical framework I am aware of. The Dremok cruiser that had fired the warning shots was now directly in the Carthage's approach path. Its captain, realizing that the warning had been ignored with contempt, began to turn, either to flee or to bring additional weapons to bear. The ship got halfway through its maneuver before the Carthage responded. 6 points of light erupted from the forward hull of the human vessel. They were not beams, exactly, and they were not projectiles in any conventional sense. My sensors registered them as concentrated packets of energy, moving at a velocity that my instruments could not accurately measure. They crossed the distance between the 2 ships in less time than it took my heart to beat once. They struck 4 Dremok warships simultaneously, the cruiser that had fired on them, and 3 other vessels that happened to be in the immediate vicinity. 4 Dremok cruisers ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no fireball expanding outward in the vacuum, no cloud of debris spinning away from a central point of destruction. The ships simply came apart. Their hulls lost structural integrity at what appeared to be a molecular level, fragmenting into clouds of particles so fine they looked like metallic dust. One moment, there were 4 warships, each crewed by thousands of Dremok sailors, each carrying enough firepower to threaten a planet. The next moment, there was nothing but a fading shimmer, dispersing into the void. The bridge of the Ascendant Will was absolutely silent. I could hear my own pulse hammering in my ears. I could hear the faint hum of the life support systems cycling air through the ventilation ducts. I could hear nothing from any officer on the bridge, because none of them were breathing. I had been a tactical officer for 22 years. I had studied weapons systems from every major and minor spacefaring species in the known galaxy. I had attended war colleges, reviewed after-action reports, analyzed weapons test footage, and participated in live-fire exercises with allies from half a dozen different species. I had seen plasma lances, kinetic accelerators, fusion torpedoes, antimatter warheads, directed energy weapons, and graviton disruptors in every configuration imaginable. I had never seen anything like what the Carthage had just done. Those 4 cruisers had not been destroyed in any sense of the word I understood. They had been unmade, disassembled at a level of precision that suggested a complete understanding of material science that went far beyond anything in our theoretical models. "What was that?" Korath whispered. "I do not know, Admiral," I said, and it was the only honest answer I could give. The Dremok fleet reacted the way any military force would react when 4 of its ships were erased from existence in a single volley by a weapon that defied understanding. The tight, disciplined formation that had been systematically dismantling our fleet for the past half hour shattered like glass struck by a stone. Ships broke in every direction, some turning to face the Carthage with weapons powered and shields at maximum, others accelerating away from the combat zone at emergency speed, a handful simply scattering at random, as if their helmsman had lost all rational thought. In the span of 60 seconds, the entire strategic landscape of the battle had been inverted. The Dremok were no longer the hunters, they were prey, and every captain in their fleet knew it. "Admiral," I said, my training finally cutting through the shock and reasserting itself over my stunned disbelief. "The Dremok formation has broken. Their coordinated pressure on our fleet has dropped by at least 70%. If we pull our surviving ships together now, we can consolidate our remaining combat power and establish a defensive perimeter while the Dremok are in disarray." Korath blinked, refocused, and the admiral I knew reasserted himself. "Do it. All ships, reform on the flagship. Defensive posture. No offensive action unless directly engaged." I relayed the orders and watched our surviving 19 vessels pull together, forming a tight cluster with the Ascendant Will at the center. The Dremok ignored us completely. Every warship they had left, over 50 vessels, was now fixated on the Carthage. "Admiral," Pell said from the communications station, "I strongly recommend we attempt to open a channel to the human vessel. If they have intervened on our behalf, tactical coordination could prevent friendly fire incidents and improve the effectiveness of both forces." Korath hesitated. I understood the reluctance, and I shared it. A species that had been absent from galactic civilization for over a century and a half had just materialized with a warship carrying weapons that transcended everything we knew about physics and warfare. Opening communications with them was stepping off the edge of a cliff with no idea whether there was ground beneath. "Do it," I said before Korath could weigh the decision further. He looked at me sharply, his expression carrying a clear rebuke for my presumption in speaking before my commanding officer. I met his gaze without flinching. "Admiral, they announced weapons free and told us to stand clear. They are fighting to protect us. The least we can do is acknowledge their existence and talk to them." He held my gaze for 2 seconds, then nodded. "Open a channel. Standard diplomatic frequency. Widest band. Identify us clearly as the Velhari Union flagship Ascendant Will, and transmit our intentions as peaceful." Pell composed the hail and transmitted it. For 15 seconds, there was nothing but static on the return channel. I found myself holding my breath. Then a voice came through the bridge speakers, clear and strong, and every officer on the deck heard a human being speak for the first time in their lives. "Velhari flagship Ascendant Will. This is Captain Grace Harlow, commanding officer of the Terran naval ship Carthage. We have identified the hostile force engaging your fleet as Dremok Dominion military vessels conducting an unprovoked attack in a monitored transit corridor. We have intervened under standing rules of engagement, authorization code, November 7 actual, requesting tactical data handshake so we can integrate your fleet positions and identity tags into our targeting matrix to avoid any possibility of friendly contact. Please transmit your fleet disposition at your earliest convenience." The voice was female. It was calm. It was precise. and it carried the kind of quiet authority that came not from rank or volume, but from absolute certainty in one's own capabilities and position. Captain Grace Harlow was not asking permission. She was not requesting assistance. She was informing us of what was happening and asking for our cooperation in making it go smoothly. "She sounds like she is filing a report," Dara muttered from the sensor station, and she was not wrong. Captain Harlow sounded like someone who had been mildly interrupted during an otherwise uneventful day. Korath gestured for me to respond. I opened the return channel, cleared my throat, and spoke to a human being for the first time in my life. "Captain Harlow, this is Commander Riva Solari, Senior Tactical Officer aboard the Ascendant Will. Transmitting fleet disposition and identity tags now. We have 19 surviving vessels, multiple ships operating at reduced capacity. Be advised, we have taken significant casualties, and our combat effectiveness is severely diminished." "Acknowledged, Commander Solari. We have your tags. Integrating now. I see 2 of your ships drifting outside your defensive formation at bearings 041 and 278. They appear to be operating on emergency power only. Recommend you pull them inside your perimeter before the hostiles in the ugly formation decide they are easy targets." I blinked. She had already mapped our entire fleet deployment, identified our 2 most vulnerable ships, assessed their power status, and provided tactical recommendations. All of this within seconds of receiving our data, while her own ship was engaged with over 50 hostile warships. "Understood, Captain. We will recover those vessels immediately. What are your intentions regarding the remaining Dremok force?" There was a brief pause, perhaps 2 seconds, and when she spoke again, I could have sworn I detected the faintest trace of amusement buried beneath the professional tone. "Our intentions are to make them stop shooting at you, Commander. Carthage out." The channel closed. I looked at Korath. He was staring at the communications console with an expression that I could not fully read, something between admiration and deep, primal unease. "Pull in those ships," he ordered quietly, "and keep watching." We watched. We had no choice. What was about to happen was beyond our ability to influence, and we all knew it. The Dremok had used the brief lull to regroup. Their commanders, to their credit, had pulled the scattered fleet back into a concentrated formation and oriented every remaining vessel toward the Carthage. Over 50 warships arranged in a layered wall of firepower, their strongest ships at the center, their fastest at the flanks, their weapons all trained on a single target. I understood their reasoning. One ship, no matter how powerful its weapons, no matter how impenetrable its shields, could not survive the concentrated fire of 50 warships, delivering their full arsenals simultaneously. It was simple mathematics. It was overwhelming force applied to a single point. The Dremok opened fire. Every ship in their formation unleashed everything they had at the same moment. Plasma lances from the cruisers, fusion torpedoes from the frigates, kinetic penetrators from the assault craft, point defense batteries turned offensive, pouring streams of accelerated projectiles into the barrage. The space around the Carthage turned white with incoming ordnance. On my tactical display, the energy concentration in the target zone exceeded anything I had ever recorded by a factor of 12. I gripped the edge of my console until my knuckles ached and watched, absolutely certain that I was about to see the most powerful warship I had ever encountered, overwhelmed by sheer volume of fire. The mathematics were clear. Nothing in the known universe could absorb that much energy and survive. The mathematics were wrong. The Carthage sat at the center of that firestorm and absorbed every single shot. Its shields held. Not barely, not with visible strain or fluctuation, or degrading integrity. They held with the casual indifference of a mountain-enduring rainfall. I watched the energy readings on my console as 50 warships poured their entire arsenals into a single target, and the shield integrity reading on the Carthage did not drop below 94%. 94%. After absorbing the combined firepower of 50 warships firing everything they had. When the Dremok volley finally ceased, either because their weapons needed to cycle, or because their gunners had simply exhausted their immediate ammunition reserves, Captain Harlow's voice came back on the open channel. This time, she was broadcasting on a wide frequency that both we and the Dremok could receive. Her tone had not changed. She might as well have been reading a transit schedule. "Dremok vessels. This is the Terran naval ship Carthage. That was your one free shot. You are hereby ordered to power down all weapons systems, deactivate defensive screens, and prepare for inspection and boarding. You have 30 seconds to comply. Any vessel that fails to comply will be treated as a hostile combatant. Carthage out. 30 seconds. She gave 50 warships 30 seconds to surrender after they had thrown absolutely everything they had at her and accomplished nothing. The audacity of it was staggering. Or perhaps audacity was the wrong word. Perhaps it was simply an accurate statement of the situation delivered without embellishment or false modesty. The Dremok did not surrender. I had not expected them to. The Dominion was a culture built on military dominance and aggressive expansion. Their officers were promoted based on combat victories, and their political leaders rose to power through demonstrations of strength. Surrender was not merely discouraged in Dremok society, it was functionally non-existent. The Carthage responded accordingly. The human warship surged forward from its position with an acceleration that made my tactical display stutter and lag as the tracking algorithms struggled to keep up. It covered the distance between itself and the Dremok formation in seconds, driving into the heart of their fleet like a blade through cloth, and it fired from every angle simultaneously. I had thought the opening volley was terrifying. 6 shots, 4 ships destroyed, surgical and clean. That was a demonstration. This was something else entirely. The Carthage had weapons arrays distributed across its entire hull surface, turrets and emitters and launch tubes that covered every firing arc, and every single one of them was active, tracking independent targets, delivering that same molecular dissolution weapon to ship after ship after ship, in a continuous, unbroken cascade of destruction. The Dremok formation did not collapse. It evaporated. I tried to keep a running count on my tactical display as enemy contacts winked out. 5 ships gone, 8, 12. The Carthage was moving through the Dremok fleet like a predator through a school of fish, untouchable and relentless. Ships that tried to stand and fight were destroyed before they could complete a firing solution. Ships that tried to run were picked off by long-range shots that tracked them with impossible accuracy. Ships that tried to hide behind the wreckage of their companions were found and eliminated within seconds. "Commander," Dara said, and her voice was shaking despite her best efforts at professional composure. "The Carthage is launching secondary objects. Small contacts, moving at extreme velocity, heading toward the Dremok command carrier." I shifted my display to focus on the Dremok flagship, the second command carrier, the largest surviving vessel in the enemy fleet and the center of their command and control structure. A cluster of small, fast-moving contacts were closing on it from multiple vectors. Drop pods, boarding craft, armored insertion vehicles designed to deliver soldiers directly through the hull of a hostile vessel. The humans were not just destroying the enemy fleet, they were capturing its command ship. Short-range tactical communications began flooding our receivers. Human voices, clipped and professional, using call signs and terminology that our translation systems struggled to parse in real time. Marines, human soldiers in powered armor, breaching the Dremok command carrier from 6 simultaneous entry points, and fighting their way through the ship's interior with a speed and coordination that defied everything I knew about boarding actions. Breach Team 1, hull penetration confirmed at Section 14. Interior atmosphere breathable. Resistance is light and poorly organized. Pushing to the command deck. Breach Team 2, we are inside at Section 22. Encountering small arms fire from security forces. Neutralizing. Continuing advance toward engineering. Breach Teams 3 through 6, secondary objectives confirmed. Weapons control, communications center, reactor access, and flight deck. All teams are on schedule. 6 entry points. 6 teams of human marines, cutting through a warship, crewed by over 8,000 Dremok personnel, a ship designed from the keel up to resist exactly this kind of assault. The Dremok were fierce fighters. Their soldiers trained for shipboard combat from the day they enlisted. Their command carriers had internal defense systems, automated weapon emplacements, blast doors, kill zones, and prepared defensive positions at every critical junction. The Dremok command carrier went dark in 9 minutes. 9 minutes from first breach to total capture. I listened to the final transmission from the Marine team leader, a calm, matter-of-fact report that the command deck was secured, the senior Dremok officers were in custody, and the ship's systems had been placed under human control. 9 minutes to take a vessel that should have held out for hours if not days. With the command carrier silenced and its coordination network collapsed, the remaining Dremok ships lost whatever cohesion they still had. Individual captains made individual decisions, and most of those decisions were some variation of running away as fast as their engines could carry them. The Carthage picked off the ships that kept firing and let the ones that broke off and fled go, which told me something important about the humans operating that vessel. They were not interested in slaughter for its own sake. They were interested in ending the threat, and once a ship stopped being a threat, they stopped shooting at it. "Admiral," I said, turning to Korath with a surge of renewed purpose, "the Dremok are in full rout. Their command structure is gone. If we commit our remaining ships now, we can support the Carthage's operations and help secure the corridor." Korath looked at the tactical display for a long moment. 19 Velhari warships, joining a battle that a single human vessel had already won, felt almost absurd. But he was a professional, and professionals did their part regardless of how small it might seem in context. "All ships, advance. Support the Terran vessel's engagement. Target any Dremok warship still displaying hostile posture." Our fleet pushed forward, and for the first time since the ambush began, we were on the offensive. I coordinated targeting data with the Carthage's tactical systems, and what I discovered in that exchange made me sit back in my chair and simply stare at my console in quiet amazement. The Carthage's tactical computer responded to my queries before I finished formulating them. It was not just processing data faster than anything I had ever encountered. It was anticipating my requests, predicting what information I would need based on the tactical situation, and preparing it in advance. It offered solutions I had not considered, angles of attack I had missed, and fleet-wide coordination patterns that optimized the firepower of our surviving ships in ways our own tactical systems were not capable of calculating. Working with it felt less like interfacing with an allied combat computer, and more like being gently guided by an intelligence that saw the battlefield in dimensions I could not perceive. The cleanup took 20 minutes. By the end of it, the Dremok ambush fleet was finished. Out of the 70 warships that had jumped into the hollow corridor planning to annihilate us, none remained in fighting condition. The majority were destroyed. Several had been disabled and were drifting. A handful had managed to reach fold space and escape. And one, the command carrier, was now a human prize, its crew under guard, and its systems under alien control. 40 minutes of active combat. One ship had accomplished what our entire 40-ship fleet had failed to do. I was still trying to reconcile that reality when Dara spoke up again, and this time her voice carried something that went beyond professional composure into something closer to awe. "Commander, long-range sensors are detecting new contacts. Multiple fold space signatures forming at the edge of the combat zone, bearing 310. 6 contacts. They are large, very large." My stomach clenched. The Dremok. Reinforcements. Of course the Dominion would not let an entire ambush fleet be destroyed without sending a response force. I pulled up the long-range display and felt a fresh wave of dread as the contacts resolved and their classifications populated. 6 ships, Dreadnought class, each one over 1,000 meters long, each one carrying siege-grade weapons designed to crack planetary shields, each one with enough firepower to threaten a full Velhari battle group on its own. 6 dreadnoughts was an extinction-level response. The Dominion was sending a clear message. They wanted the hollow corridor, and they were willing to commit their heaviest assets to take it. But Dara was not finished. Additional contacts forming behind the dreadnought group. 3 signatures. Smaller. Same energy profile as the Carthage. I looked at the display with my heart hammering against my ribs. Behind the 6 Dremok dreadnoughts, 3 more vessels were emerging from fold space, and their energy signatures were identical to the ship that had just single-handedly annihilated a 70-ship fleet. The same clean, impossible power output. The same stealth coating that made them near invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. The same matte black hulls built for one purpose, and one purpose only. More human warships. Captain Harlow's voice came through the communications channel, but this time she was not addressing us or the Dremok. She was talking to the new arrivals, and her tone shifted from professional courtesy to something warmer. Not casual exactly, but familiar. The tone of someone greeting colleagues she trusted absolutely. Carthage Actual to Patrol Group Elements. Welcome to the party. You are late. Hostiles have brought heavy reinforcements, 6 Dreadnought-class vessels on approach. Requesting immediate formation and engagement at discretion. Let us finish this before dinner gets cold. 3 responses came back across the channel. 3 different voices, each one carrying the same unshakable calm that seemed to be a defining characteristic of every human I had heard speak today. Thermopylae copies Carthage. Moving to engagement position. 2 dreadnoughts looks about right for us. Hadrian here. Weapons are hot. On your wing. Grace, save us the pretty ones. Magellan. Reading 6 heavy targets on approach. Allocating targeting solutions now. This should not take long. 4 human warships. 4 ships against 6 dreadnoughts, each one a vessel class that the Velhari Union considered functionally unstoppable in any engagement short of a full fleet action. And not a single human voice carried even the faintest trace of concern. Korath turned to me. His expression was unlike anything I had ever seen on a Velhari admiral's face. It was not fear. It was not gratitude. It was the look of a man who had just realized, with absolute and irrevocable clarity, that everything he believed about the balance of power in the galaxy was wrong. Every strategic assumption, every threat assessment, every military projection that the Union had built its defense policy around was based on a model of the universe that no longer existed. Commander Solari, he said quietly, I believe we should stay out of their way and observe. I nodded. There was nothing to add. We watched. The 4 human warships moved into formation with a precision that transcended anything I had witnessed in my career. They did not communicate formation orders on any channel that our sensors could detect, which meant they were either using a communication technology beyond our ability to intercept, or they were so extensively trained, so deeply synchronized, that they did not need verbal commands to coordinate their movements. Each ship slid into position relative to the others with the accuracy of a mathematical proof, forming a diamond pattern with the Carthage at the leading point and the 3 newcomers arranged behind and to each side. The Dremok dreadnoughts had arrived, expecting to find a battle in progress that they could decisively swing in the Dominion's favor. Instead, they found the wreckage of a 70-ship fleet scattered across 1,000,000 kilometers of space, and 4 unknown warships moving toward them with unmistakable hostile intent. The dreadnought commanders, to their credit, reacted with professional speed. They formed a wall, 6 ships abreast, overlapping their shield perimeters and beginning the charge sequence on their primary weapons. Dremok dreadnoughts carried siege-class plasma batteries, massive weapons systems designed for planetary bombardment and fleet-killing engagements. Each battery could fire a sustained beam that carried enough concentrated energy to melt through a kilometer of solid bedrock. Against a conventional fleet, 6 dreadnoughts firing together could erase an entire battle group in a single coordinated volley. They never got the chance to complete the firing sequence. The human patrol group struck first, and the coordination was beyond anything I could have conceived. 4 ships firing simultaneously, with weapons synchronized to the microsecond, creating overlapping fields of destruction that were not merely targeted at individual ships, but at the spaces between them. Escape routes were cut off by precision fire before the Dremok helmsmen could even begin evasive maneuvers. Propulsion systems were disabled by shots that struck with surgical accuracy, leaving their targets adrift and helpless. Shield generators were stripped away in precise sequences that left each dreadnought defenseless in the moments before the killing blow arrived. The first dreadnought lasted 40 seconds. Its shields buckled under concentrated fire from the Carthage and the Thermopylae, layers of plasma screening collapsing inward, like walls being pushed over one after another, and then a single shot from the Hadrian punched through the exposed hull and struck the main reactor. The resulting explosion was visible to the naked eye through the bridge viewport, a bloom of white light that expanded to orange and then faded to nothing, leaving behind a debris field that had been a 1,000-meter warship moments before. The 2nd and 3rd dreadnoughts tried to break formation, spinning their massive frames to bring broadsides to bear, while simultaneously accelerating away from the kill zone in opposite directions. The Magellan positioned itself between the 2 retreating vessels and fired in both directions at once, herding them back toward the rest of the patrol group with shots that struck just ahead of their flight paths. They lasted less than a minute each, caught between the Magellan's harassment fire and killing shots from the other 3 human vessels that found them the moment they slowed. The 4th dreadnought attempted to jump to fold space. Its engines spooled up. The characteristic spatial distortion of a fold space entry began forming around its hull, and for a moment it looked like at least one Dremok ship would escape. Then something happened, something the human ships did that I could not identify or explain. The fold space envelope collapsed. Not gradually, not through interference or disruption, but instantly, as if someone had reached out and pressed a button. The dreadnought reappeared in normal space with half its hull missing. The rest of the vessel warped and twisted into impossible shapes by the catastrophic failure of the spatial transition. It drifted, dead and broken, venting atmosphere from 100 ruptures. The 5th and 6th dreadnoughts surrendered. Their commanders, having watched 4 sister ships destroyed in under 3 minutes by an enemy they could not hurt, could not escape, and could not even properly track, powered down their weapons, dropped their shields, and broadcast surrender signals on every available frequency. The battle for the hollow corridor was over. I stood at my console and stared at the aftermath displayed on my tactical screen. 76 Dremok warships, including 6 Dreadnought-class capital ships, had been destroyed, captured, or routed. The force that had accomplished this consisted of 4 human vessels, operating together for less than 20 minutes. 4 ships, against 76, and the humans had not lost a single one, had not, as far as I could determine from the sensor data, even been scratched. Korath broke the silence that had settled over the bridge. His voice was measured, careful, each word chosen with the deliberation of a man who understood that what he said next would be recorded in official logs and studied by historians. Commander Solari, open a channel to Captain Harlow. Request a formal diplomatic meeting aboard the Ascendant Will. I wish to speak with her in person. I opened the channel. Captain Harlow, this is Commander Solari. Admiral Korath of the Velhari Union respectfully requests the honor of a meeting aboard the Ascendant Will. We wish to express our gratitude for your intervention and to discuss the events of today. Harlow's response came after a brief pause. Acknowledged, Commander. I will come aboard with a small security detail. 1 hour. Please transmit docking coordinates for a personnel shuttle. Harlow out. 1 hour. We had 60 minutes to prepare for the first face-to-face meeting between a Velhari officer and a human being in over a century. Korath spent that hour doing things I had never seen him do in 11 years of service. He ordered the bridge cleaned, every piece of debris cleared, every damaged panel replaced or covered with temporary patching. He changed into his formal dress uniform, the dark blue coat with silver trim that he wore for state occasions and diplomatic functions. He ordered a proper reception arranged in the main conference room, with translation systems tested and retested and refreshments prepared, though no one had any idea what humans ate or drank. I spent that hour in my quarters doing something different. I pulled up every historical file in the Velhari database that mentioned humanity and read as much as I could absorb. The records were fragmentary, incomplete, and clearly outdated. Humans had been part of the galactic community for roughly 200 years before the dissolution. During that time, they had been classified as a mid-tier species. Respectable technology, but not exceptional. A decent military, adequate for self-defense but not considered a major power. An economy that was growing but unremarkable. Nothing in any historical file suggested a species capable of building what I had just witnessed. Something fundamental had changed during those 130 years of silence. Something so profound that the humanity which withdrew from the galaxy bore no resemblance to the humanity that had just re-emerged from it. The shuttle arrived precisely on time, not approximately on time, not within an acceptable window of variance. Precisely, to the second. It was a small craft, sleek and angular, matching the matte black aesthetic of the Carthage itself, and it landed in our docking bay with a smoothness that made our own pilots look like students still learning their instruments. The hatch opened, and Captain Grace Harlow stepped onto a Velhari warship. She was shorter than I expected. The historical records described humans as average in height compared to the galactic mean, and Harlow was on the shorter end even by human standards. But what she lacked in stature, she more than compensated for in presence. She was solidly built, compact and efficient, with dark hair pulled back in a tight knot and steady brown eyes that swept the docking bay, with an assessment so rapid and thorough that I knew she had mapped every exit, every potential threat, and every structural weakness before she had taken her third step. Her uniform was dark gray, almost black, with minimal insignia. No medals, no campaign ribbons, no decorations of any kind, just a small silver pin on her collar that I assumed denoted her rank and position. In a galaxy where military officers from most species adorn themselves with indicators of their achievements and authority, Harlow's plain uniform sent a message that was impossible to miss. She did not need decorations to tell people who she was. Her ship had already done that. Her security detail consisted of 4 soldiers in powered armor that made our best combat suits look like historical relics. The armor was matte gray, form-fitting, and covered in sensor arrays and weapon mounts that I could not identify. The soldiers moved with a fluid grace that should have been physically impossible in equipment of that mass and complexity, and their weapons were secured on maglocks at their backs, not drawn, but accessible within a heartbeat. Harlow walked toward us with a stride that was confident without being aggressive. She stopped in front of Admiral Korath and gave a nod that was carefully calibrated, respectful without being deferential, acknowledgement without submission. Admiral Korath, Captain Grace Harlow, Terran Naval Ship Carthage, thank you for having me aboard. Korath returned the nod with equal precision. Captain Harlow, on behalf of the Velhari Union, the crew of this vessel, and the crews of the 19 warships that survived today because of your actions, I extend our deepest and most sincere gratitude. Your intervention saved this fleet from annihilation. You were outgunned in a prepared ambush with no avenue of retreat, Harlow said. Anyone would have stepped in. I noted the careful wording. She had not said anyone could have stepped in. She said anyone would have. The capability was assumed. Only the willingness was presented as the variable. Korath led us to the conference room. Harlow sat across the table from him with her hands folded calmly before her. I sat to Korath's right in my official capacity as senior tactical officer, though my actual motivation for being there had very little to do with tactics, and everything to do with the fact that I was looking at a member of a species that the galaxy had given up for dead. Captain, Korath began, choosing his words with the care of a diplomat and the urgency of a military commander who needed answers, I must ask the question that I believe every species in this sector of the galaxy will be asking within a very short time. Where did you come from? Humanity has been absent from galactic affairs for over a century. The prevailing belief, across every species and every government, was that your civilization had suffered some form of catastrophic collapse. Harlow's expression remained neutral, professional, unreadable. The term most commonly used by other species is the dissolution. We are aware of the theories. We have been monitoring galactic communications for some time. The correct term, the one we use internally, is the withdrawal. It was neither a collapse nor a catastrophe. It was a deliberate strategic decision made at the highest levels of our government, executed over a period of approximately 18 months, and maintained consistently for 130 years. A deliberate decision to abandon the entire galactic community? Korath asked, and I could hear the tension beneath his diplomatic tone. An admiral who had just watched his fleet nearly die was not in the mood for evasive answers. A deliberate decision to step back from the galactic community. Temporarily. 130 years is a rather long time to characterize as temporary, Captain. It depends on what you are preparing for, Admiral. Some things take time. What things? Preparing for what? Harlow did not answer immediately. She studied Korath's face with those sharp brown eyes, and I had the distinct sensation of watching someone make a decision about how much truth to share. Not whether to lie, but how much of the full picture to reveal. That answer sits above my authorization level, she said finally. I am a ship captain. Strategic disclosures about the scope and purpose of the withdrawal are a matter for my government. What I can tell you is that the Carthage and its patrol group were not in the hollow corridor by accident. We were conducting a routine patrol sweep of this sector. Routine, Korath repeated, and the word carried a freight of implications. This corridor is deep in neutral space, thousands of light years from Earth's last known borders. What do you consider routine about operating here? This corridor falls within what we designate as our extended observation zone. We monitor it. We have been monitoring it for quite some time. I spoke up, unable to contain the question that had been burning in my mind since the battle ended. How many ships do you have, Captain? How large is the Terran Navy? Harlow looked at me, and for a fraction of a second I saw something flicker across her expression. Not quite a smile, but the hint of one, as if the question amused her in a way she could not fully show. The patrol group you saw today, 4 ships, is the smallest standard operational unit in the Terran Navy. We call it a lance. A lance, their smallest unit, 4 ships that had destroyed 76 warships, including 6 dreadnoughts, without suffering a single casualty, was the minimum deployment they considered worth organizing. And the largest? I pressed. Harlow tilted her head slightly. She did not answer the question directly. Instead, she reached into a uniform pocket and produced a small device, a flat disc about the size of her palm. She placed it on the table, pressed its surface once, and a holographic projection appeared above it. It was a star chart, more detailed than anything in the Velhari database, showing the galaxy with a resolution and accuracy that made our best cartographic surveys look like rough sketches. Systems were marked that we had never even detected, trade routes mapped that we had never known existed, spatial anomalies cataloged that our science division would have spent decades studying. But the detail of the map was not what made every officer in the room stop breathing. It was the boundary line, a border drawn in soft blue light, overlaid on the familiar stars and systems, enclosing a territory so vast that my mind initially refused to process the scale. The boundary covered roughly a third of the known galaxy. This is our extended observation zone, Harlow said quietly. Everything inside this boundary is monitored, patrolled, and if necessary, defended by the Terran Navy. I stared at the map. The Velhari Union, one of the larger political entities in the galaxy, occupied approximately 4% of the space enclosed by that boundary. The Dremok Dominion, the most aggressively expansionist military power in known space, occupied perhaps 6%. Every territory held by every spacefaring species in the galaxy, if combined into a single contiguous block, would fit inside the human observation zone, with vast stretches of space left over. Korath rose slowly from his chair. He walked to the holographic display and stood before it, his face reflecting the blue light of that impossible boundary line. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet, stripped of all diplomatic veneer, all military formality. Just a man confronting a truth he had not been prepared for. "You did not collapse," he said. "No, Admiral, we did not. You did not regress or destroy yourselves. No. You have been building. For 130 years, behind that border, you have been building." "Yes." "Building what?" Harlow looked at him with an expression that I would later come to recognize as something uniquely and distinctly human. It was not pride, it was not menace, it was resolve. The deep, patient, immovable resolve of a species that had looked at the universe, understood what was required, and committed itself to the task for over a century, without complaint, without recognition, and without asking anyone's permission. "Whatever was necessary," she said. The meeting ended shortly after that exchange. Harlow was polite, but firmly bounded in what she would discuss. She answered some questions with direct clarity, deflected others with practiced diplomatic skill, and refused several with a bluntness that was almost refreshing in its honesty. When she left, she shook Korath's hand in the human fashion and gave me a nod that I felt carried more weight than any formal decoration or salute I had ever received. I watched her shuttle cross the void between our ships and disappear into the docking bay of the Carthage. I stood at the viewport for a long time after that, staring at the impossible black hull of a warship that should not exist, built by a species that was supposed to be dead, carrying weapons that broke every rule of warfare I had ever learned. The universe was not what I had thought it was. It had not been what I thought it was for a very long time. The only thing that had changed today was that I finally knew it. 3 days later, I stood in the grand chamber of the Velhari High Council and delivered the most important briefing of my career to the most important audience I had ever addressed. The chamber was full beyond capacity. Every council member was present. Every senior military advisor, every intelligence director, every strategic analyst in the Velhari Union had been summoned. Diplomatic observers from 6 different species occupied the gallery seats, representatives from governments that had heard the first fragmented rumors of what had happened in the hollow corridor and had demanded to be present for the official account. I stood at the central podium, beneath the domed ceiling painted with star maps that the Union's founders had charted 5,000 years ago, and I told them everything, every detail, every number, every impossible thing I had witnessed. I told them about the ambush, 70 Dremok ships against our 40, a ratio that should have guaranteed our destruction, and very nearly did. I told them about the 12 ships we lost in the first 20 minutes, about the jump corridors that were sealed before we knew the trap had been sprung, about the moment when I ran the projections, and every single one of them ended with the Third Fleet's total destruction. I told them about the signal. The single contact on Ensign Dara's sensor display, the vessel sitting dark at the edge of the combat zone, bigger than anything on either side of the engagement. I told them about the broadcast in Terran Standard, a language that no one in the galaxy had heard from a warship in 130 years. I told them about the weapons, the 6 shots that dissolved 4 cruisers at a molecular level, the shields that absorbed the combined firepower of 50 warships and barely registered the impact, the boarding action that captured a command carrier in 9 minutes, the patrol group that destroyed 6 dreadnoughts in under 3 minutes. And I told them about the star chart, the blue boundary line, the extended observation zone that covered a third of the galaxy. The chamber erupted. Council members shouted over each other, demanding clarification, challenging specific claims, arguing about implications. Military officials called for immediate threat assessments and defense reviews. Intelligence directors insisted that the data must be exaggerated or fabricated, that no species could have built that level of capability in secret for over a century. Diplomatic observers were speaking urgently into private communications devices, transmitting every word back to their respective governments in real time. I stood at the podium and waited. The noise crested, held, and eventually began to subside as the reality of what I was telling them sank past the initial shock and settled into the deeper processing centers of minds trained for strategic thought. When the chamber was quiet enough for my voice to carry, I spoke again. The strategic implications of what I witnessed are beyond any scenario we have ever modeled. Every alliance, every border agreement, every military calculation, every assumption about the balance of power in this galaxy is now obsolete. Not weakened, not altered, obsolete. The Dremok Dominion ambushed us with 70 warships and 6 dreadnoughts. They deployed their strongest fleet elements to crush us and secure the hollow corridor. 1 human warship stopped them. 3 more arrived and finished the job. This was their smallest operational deployment, 4 ships that they call a lance. I paused to let the weight of that word settle across the chamber. If we assume even a conservative scaling of their force structure, the Terran Navy could field hundreds of such lances. Thousands. We do not know the upper limit, because Captain Harlow chose not to disclose it. What we do know is that their observation zone, the territory they claim to actively patrol and defend, covers a third of the galaxy. Maintaining surveillance and security over that volume of space would require a fleet of staggering size. High Counselor Verath, the eldest and most influential member of the body, leaned forward in her elevated seat. What of the Dremok? How have they responded? Intelligence reports are already arriving, I said. The Dremok Dominion, upon receiving confirmation that their fleet was destroyed by 4 human ships, has begun withdrawing military forces from 3 active fronts. Their expansion campaigns along the Surani border and the Pelori Reach have been suspended. The Dominion's military command is conducting a complete strategic reassessment. I looked around the chamber. Other species observers were nodding or making notes. The ripple effects were already spreading. The Surani Collective has recalled all ambassadors for emergency consultations. The Kethiri Trade Federation has suspended military operations pending reassessment. 3 smaller powers that I am aware of have initiated diplomatic outreach attempts toward human-controlled space. The mere confirmed existence of human warships in open space has changed the strategic calculus for every government in the galaxy. And all of this is based on a single engagement involving 4 ships. The chamber was very quiet now. The kind of quiet that falls when powerful beings realize they are small. "There is one more thing I need to convey," I said. "And I believe it is the most important element of everything I have reported. The humans did not attack us. They saved us." Captain Harlow intervened to protect a Velhari fleet from an unprovoked assault by a hostile power. She could have watched. She could have let the Dremok destroy us, and used the resulting power vacuum to her own advantage. Instead, she risked revealing the existence of the Terran Navy, a secret her species had maintained for 130 years, to save the lives of aliens she had never met. I straightened my shoulders and delivered my conclusion with every ounce of conviction I possessed. That choice matters. In a galaxy where military superiority has always been used as a tool of conquest and subjugation, the humans possessed an advantage so overwhelming that resistance would have been functionally meaningless, and they used it to protect strangers. I recommend, in the strongest possible terms, that the Velhari Union establish formal diplomatic relations with the Terran Navy immediately. We are the first species to fight alongside them in over a century. That gives us a unique and irreplaceable position. I recommend we use it before someone else does. The debate that followed lasted 4 hours. Arguments for and against engagement were presented with passion, with data, with fear, and with hope. In the end, the vote was unanimous. The Velhari Union would reach out to humanity and seek to establish the first formal diplomatic relationship between any alien government and the Terran Navy since the withdrawal. And they asked me to do it. I accepted without a moment's hesitation. The High Council appointed me as the Velhari Union's first official liaison to the Terran Navy, the first bridge between our species and a civilization that had remade itself in secret over the course of 130 years. My orders were broad and simple: learn what you can, build trust where possible, and report back anything that affects the security and future of the Union. I sent a formal request to the Carthage, asking permission to come aboard as an official representative of the Velhari government. Captain Harlow's response came within the hour. Permission granted. She would receive me personally. The shuttle ride from the Ascendant Will to the Carthage took 12 minutes, and I spent every second of it staring through the viewport at the human warship, growing larger and larger in my field of vision. I had tracked the Carthage on tactical sensors during the battle. I had seen its energy readings, watched its weapons fire, recorded its speed and maneuverability. But all of that was data, numbers on a screen, abstractions that my mind could process without truly comprehending. Seeing it with my own eyes was entirely different. The Carthage was not just large. It was built with a design philosophy that I had never encountered in any warship from any species. Every surface was angled, layered in overlapping armor plates that I now realized were modular, designed to be replaced individually in the field without requiring a shipyard. The turret arrays I had watched firing during the battle were retracted now, folded smoothly into the hull, like claws drawn into a paw, invisible unless you knew where to look. The hull absorbed light rather than reflecting it, giving the ship a quality of existing as a shadow rather than an object, a hole in the starfield shaped like something built for war. I docked in a bay that was larger than the entire flight deck on the Ascendant Will. Human crew members moved through the space with practiced efficiency, guiding shuttles to landing positions, managing supply containers, performing maintenance on equipment I could not identify. They wore the same dark gray uniforms I had seen on Harlow, and they moved with the particular kind of relaxed confidence that came from competence so deeply ingrained it had become invisible to its possessors. Captain Harlow met me at the docking bay entrance, accompanied by a young officer she introduced as Lieutenant Neil Ashford, her executive aide, and a woman with different rank insignia who was identified as Sergeant Diana Cole, who would serve as my escort and guide during my time aboard. "Welcome aboard the Carthage, Commander Solari," Harlow said. "I understand you have been appointed as the first Velhari liaison to our Navy." "I have, Captain. I hope that is acceptable." "More than acceptable. It is encouraging. To be candid, We were wondering how long it would take someone to ask. She said it lightly, but the implications were heavy. They had been waiting, watching, hoping that someone would reach out rather than react with fear or aggression. The fact that we had done so, and done so quickly, clearly mattered to her. She led me into the ship, and with every corridor we traversed, every compartment we passed through, the distance between what I had believed about humanity and what was actually true stretched wider and wider until the gap became something I could not measure. The technology was not just advanced. It was generationally beyond anything in the Velhari database, and the Velhari were not a technologically backward species. Our science was the product of 5 millennia of continuous development. We had believed ourselves to be among the most sophisticated civilizations in the galaxy. Walking through the Carthage dismantled that belief with the gentleness of someone correcting a child who had misunderstood something fundamental. The life support systems maintained atmospheric composition with a precision so exact that I could feel the difference in the quality of the air within my first few breaths aboard. It was cleaner, more balanced, more comfortable than any artificial atmosphere I had ever experienced. The lighting adjusted automatically as we moved through different sections of the ship, shifting in color, temperature, and intensity to match the circadian rhythms of the crew, creating an environment that felt less like a warship and more like a living space, designed by people who understood that comfort was not a luxury, but a prerequisite for sustained performance. The bulkheads were lined with a composite material that Sergeant Cole, who proved to be both friendly and informative, told me could self-repair minor structural damage without crew intervention. Microfractures, small impact damage, even minor hull breaches could be sealed automatically by the material itself, reducing maintenance requirements and improving survivability in combat. Harlow showed me the fabrication bays, and I understood immediately why the Carthage could operate independently in deep space. These were not simple repair shops or parts storage facilities. They were full-scale manufacturing centers, automated systems capable of producing replacement components, ammunition, drone vehicles, medical supplies, and structural materials from raw feedstock stored in the ship's holds. The Carthage did not need supply lines. It carried its own industrial base inside its hull. She showed me the drone wings, racks upon racks of unmanned vehicles in configurations I had never seen, reconnaissance platforms, combat units, electronic warfare systems, and repair drones that could perform hull maintenance while the ship was underway. An entire auxiliary fleet lived inside the Carthage, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. She showed me the medical bay, where technology that would have been considered miraculous by Velhari medical standards was treated as standard equipment. Regeneration beds that could rebuild damaged tissue, surgical systems that could operate with a precision no living surgeon could match, diagnostic scanners that could detect pathology at a cellular level. Harlow mentioned, casually, that the Carthage could treat most combat injuries to full recovery within hours. Hours. On a Velhari ship, the same injuries would require weeks of treatment and might never fully heal. Through it all, the crew moved around us with quiet professionalism. They acknowledged their captain with respectful nods, regarded me with polite curiosity, and went about their duties without fanfare or disruption. These were not soldiers on edge about having an alien on their ship. These were people who were exceptionally good at their jobs and saw no need to perform their competence for an audience. "Captain," I said, as we stood on an observation deck overlooking one of the fabrication bays, watching robotic arms assemble something I could not identify with fluid, tireless precision. "May I ask you something directly?" "You may ask, Commander. I may not be able to answer everything, but I will not lie to you." "Why did humanity withdraw? You were part of the galactic community. You had partners, allies, trade agreements, diplomatic networks, built over 2 centuries. What made your leaders decide to leave all of it behind?" Harlow was quiet for a long time. She rested her hands on the observation deck railing and looked out over the fabrication bay, watching the automated systems work, and when she spoke, her voice was different from anything I had heard from her before. Softer, more personal, less the voice of a ship captain, and more the voice of a human being carrying the weight of something very large. "Because we saw the pattern," she said. "We had been part of the galactic community for 200 years, Commander. That was long enough to see the cycle play out several times over. Every century, a new major conflict. Every few decades, a new arms race. Species fighting over territory, resources, ideology, old grudges. Alliances forming and dissolving, wars ending in ways that guaranteed the next war. We participated in that cycle. We fought in those conflicts. We lost people in those wars. And after 200 years of it, our leadership concluded that participation was not going to change the underlying dynamics. So you left to escape the fighting? No. She turned to face me, and her expression was the most serious I had seen from her, more intense than during the battle, more weighted than during the diplomatic meeting with Korath. We left to prepare for the fighting that actually matters. The air on the observation deck suddenly felt colder. What fighting is that, Captain? Harlow studied me for several seconds, making a decision. I could see it happening behind her eyes, the calculation of trust, the weighing of disclosure against secrecy. Whatever she decided it quickly. Commander Solari, humanity did not spend 130 years building this navy to settle trade disputes or enforce colonial borders. We built it because our deep space observation network, a system we deployed in the first decades after the withdrawal, detected something in the void beyond the galactic rim. Something moving inward, something large, organized, and unlike anything any species in this galaxy has ever encountered. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What is it? We do not have a complete answer to that question, not yet. Our observation platforms have been tracking it for over a century, and what we know is limited but consistent. It is not from this galaxy. It is not any species we have encountered, cataloged, or theorized about. It appears to be a coordinated force of some kind, though whether it is biological, mechanical, or something we do not have a category for, remains uncertain. What we do know with high confidence is its trajectory and its approximate timeline. Timeline for what? For reaching the outer systems of this galaxy. Based on current projections, contact will occur within the next 50 to 70 years. 50 to 70 years, less than a single Velhari lifetime, less than a single generation by the reckoning of most galactic species. The thing in the void, the unknown force that had driven humanity to withdraw from the galaxy and spend over a century building a military machine of unimaginable scale, was not some distant theoretical concern. It was coming within the lifetime of people already alive. The withdrawal was never about leaving the galaxy behind, Harlow continued, her voice steady and clear. It was about buying time. We needed to develop technology, build ships, train personnel, and establish a defensive infrastructure on a scale that would have been completely impossible while we were entangled in galactic politics. Every summit we attended, every trade negotiation we participated in, every border dispute we helped mediate, was time and energy taken away from the only project that truly mattered. And the observation zone? The patrols? We have been watching over the galaxy for decades, Commander. Quietly. Without credit or acknowledgement. We needed to make sure that the species we will one day need as allies did not destroy each other before the real threat arrived. When we saw your fleet being ambushed in the hollow corridor, we intervened because we need the Velhari Union intact. We need the Serani Collective intact. We need every capable military force in this galaxy preserved and ready for what is coming. We cannot afford to let the Dremok, or anyone else, eliminate potential allies over a transit corridor. I stood on that observation deck, inside a warship more powerful than my entire fleet, and tried to absorb what I was hearing. Humanity had not abandoned the galaxy. They had been protecting it. Silently, thanklessly, without recognition or reward, they had been standing watch over a galaxy that had written them off as failures and spent 130 years building the shield that might be the difference between survival and extinction. You could have told us, I said. 130 years ago, when you first detected this threat, you could have shared the information. We could have prepared together. Harlow shook her head slowly. Could we? In a galaxy where species ambush each other in neutral corridors, where alliances last only as long as the specific threat they were formed to counter. If we had announced an extragalactic threat 130 years ago, Half the galaxy would have dismissed it as fabrication or paranoia, and the other half would have tried to seize our technology for themselves. We needed to be strong enough that when we stepped forward again, no one could take what we had built by force. And we needed the galaxy to see, clearly and undeniably, what we are capable of. So the battle today was not just a rescue operation, it was a demonstration. She met my gaze without flinching. It was both, and it was the beginning of something larger. We cannot hold the rim alone, Commander. When the time comes, we will need every species standing together. Every fleet, every soldier, every ship. Building that coalition, earning that trust, starts with conversations exactly like this one. I looked out through the viewport at the stars. The same stars I had navigated by since I was a junior officer, learning to read a chart. The same constellations that had hung over my homeworld since my species first looked up at the sky and wondered what was out there. They looked different now. They looked like a perimeter, a line that needed holding. "What do you need from the Velhari Union?" I asked. "Time, honesty, and eventually, when you are ready, partnership. Real partnership, not a treaty of convenience that dissolves at the first political shift. The kind of partnership that means your ships fly next to ours, and your soldiers stand beside our soldiers, and no one has to wonder whether the ally on their flank will still be there when things get difficult." I thought about the 12 ships we had lost in the ambush. I thought about the crews who died in the first 20 minutes, before the Carthage appeared, before anyone knew that help was coming. I thought about the Dremok commanders, who had planned that ambush with cold precision, who had sealed our jump corridors and boxed us in, and begun the systematic destruction of our fleet without mercy or hesitation. And then I thought about a single human ship, appearing from nowhere, broadcasting a signal that nobody in the galaxy expected to hear, and throwing itself into a battle that was not its own to save people it had never met. I thought about 4 ships against 76, about weapons that unmade warships at a molecular level, about shields that treated the combined firepower of 50 enemies as a minor inconvenience, about Marines who captured a command carrier in 9 minutes, and a captain who delivered a surrender ultimatum with the calm certainty of someone reading a weather report. Whatever was coming from beyond the galactic rim, humanity had spent 130 years building to meet it. They had done it alone, without allies, without support, without the knowledge or gratitude of a single other species. They had watched over a galaxy that had forgotten them, protected civilizations that believed them dead, and built a military force of such overwhelming capability that 4 of their smallest operational units could reshape the strategic landscape of known space in a single afternoon. I was afraid of what was coming. Any rational being would be, faced with the knowledge that something unknown and potentially devastating was approaching from outside the galaxy. But standing on that observation deck, surrounded by technology that was 130 years ahead of anything my species had ever produced, I felt something else beneath the fear. Something that I had not expected and could not entirely explain. I felt hope. Because if the galaxy needed to choose one species to lead them into the darkness, it should be the one that had spent over a century preparing for it, without asking for recognition, without demanding gratitude, and without ever, for a single moment, giving up on the rest of us. I turned to Captain Grace Harlow and extended my hand in the human fashion, the way I had seen Admiral Korath do it 3 days earlier at the diplomatic meeting. "Partnership," I said. She took my hand and gripped it firmly, her brown eyes meeting mine with an intensity that carried the weight of 130 years of preparation, sacrifice, and unshakable purpose. "Partnership," she agreed. And somewhere far beyond the galaxy's rim, in the vast and lightless void between galaxies, where no star burned and no signal reached, something ancient and enormous continued its slow, patient approach. It did not yet know about the Carthage. It did not know about the Terran Navy or the observation zone or the 130 years of silent preparation. It did not know about a species that had looked into the abyss, seen what was coming, and chosen not to run but to build. It would learn.